Now for Raising the Bar, Greater RVA's premier law talk radio show. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
Good morning and welcome to Raising the Bar Law Talk Radio Show. This is attorney Colleen Quinn, your program host, and I'm an attorney with Locke & Quinn. And we are really thrilled today to talk about modern day feuds, cyberbullying, revenge porn, and when are cyber posts mightier than the sword? Unlike the Hatfields and McCoys of yesterday or yesteryear, or decades ago actually, modern day feuding has taken on a whole new tactic. And so today's show is going to be pretty interesting. And if you would like to call into the show with any of your questions or comments about modern day feuding, including cyber feuds and Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook feuding, call in at 804-454-1366. And just briefly remember that Raising the Bar Law Talk Radio, the videos are recorded on the Locke & Quinn Facebook Live page, and also now you can subscribe on iTunes to all of the podcasts. You simply go to Raising the Bar Law Talk on iTunes, and please subscribe to our podcast because they feature a lot of different areas of the law. Of course, the law impacts everyone in one way or another, whether it's employment law or criminal law, if you get a traffic ticket, or if you're unfortunate enough to have to go through a divorce, if you have a workers' comp claim, and I could go on, but we need to get on to today's topic. So remember that Locke & Quinn is conveniently located at Willow Lawn, and you can come get a plethora of dining options along with your personal legal services. We provide a variety of legal services, including personal injury, med-mal, family law, adoption, surrogacy, estate planning, employment law. And if we can't do it, we'll make sure we put you in the good hands of somebody that can. Finally, the law is not something everyone can afford. And if you go to the Raising the Bar Law Talk Radio webpage, we have listed there all of the low cost and pro bono free legal services that are available for veterans, folks with disabilities. A variety of services are out there because lawyers can be expensive, can't they, Katie?
Yes, we can.
All right. And joining me today is attorney Katie Kitts-Dean, and we're going to yin and yang about modern day feuding. Mm-hmm. Of course, anyone that has either seen or heard of the Broadway show or knows the story of Alexander Hamilton knows that a very old type of feud was between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, and of course they used pistols at that time. Well, now in modern day feuds, they aren't quite as deadly, right. But they words and images can do a lot of harm, and they can actually be deadly to the point of somebody actually committing suicide, mm-hmm. Which we know about. And of course, where is the law in all of this? And we're going to discuss why the law is so, unfortunately, way behind today's mm-hmm. modern day feuding.
Absolutely. All right. So, Colleen, let's start with some background. What are some of the different ways that you see people using the internet and other forms of modern technology to engage in feuds or disagreements?
Well, and Katie, at Locke & Quinn, we have had to do quite a number of cease and desist letters and then also research on the applicable areas of the law, because we are seeing folks that are feuding on Facebook mm-hmm. and even sneaking in onto LinkedIn with some feuding. And of course, Snapchat and Instagram. And of course, you're younger than I am, but I believe that it is Snapchat where the photo's only there for 30 days. Yep, okay, right. So that makes it a little bit harder to prove what was posted. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're going to talk about revenge porn, mm-hmm. and especially a Virginia case on point on the revenge porn. And the review sites. So when folks are reviewing on Yelp, et cetera, and even the lawyers are getting hit because mm-hmm. the Avvo reviews and other reviews, Martindale Hubbell, I had a review by somebody that I never met with.
Never come into the office.
Never come into the office. And so I had to fight with Avvo to delete that bad mm-hmm. review because there was no record of from the detailed facts. That person obviously had the wrong attorney.
Right.
And then we have the Twitter feuds going on. We even have our own president, Donald Trump, who is Twitter feuding with Kim Jong-un. And then you know a little bit more about the Kim Kardashian Taylor Swift feud.
Oh yeah, you get celebrities all the time, and there. I think that one involved Taylor Swift leaving some sort of voicemail for Kanye West, and then claiming she never talked to him, and his wife Kim Kardashian saved the voicemail and posted it on Twitter, and it just became this very public, all written down, all recorded. Everything that was said is recorded, and it just became this public feud between them, all thanks to the internet,
right,
and technology.
Right. And I guess, and the really good thing though is that it's all being recorded, right? So that if somebody has a case, at least the evidence is there
Right.
for the most part. The really bad thing though is that it's recorded and then disseminated and can potentially go viral and be shared with others, etc.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then there's the Wendy's and McDonald's.
Yes, I think anyone who watched the Super Bowl on Sunday maybe caught that Wendy's commercial where they were just pulling language from the McDonald's website about the ingredients that they used in their food and that they used frozen beef. And for anyone who's a little bit more familiar with the Wendy's Twitter feed, they are pretty pointedly targeting McDonald's regularly, and the two companies kind of have their own. That one's a little bit funnier. It's not maybe quite as malicious.
It's not
more
as
of a marketing.
It's like revenge porn, but it's
Right.
just a little more comical. But still, it's a modern day feud
Yeah.
that's going on, which was just as entertaining. At least the Super Bowl was
Right.
a good game this year, so you couldn't get up from your seat between the commercials and the game.
So, sort of continuing on this topic, how has the internet changed the way that people are able to fight?
Well, it pretty much allows anyone with a phone and a Wi-Fi connection access to potentially the entire public. You know, so before, if you had a feud, you might dump trash in the neighbor's backyard. I actually had a case where that was occurring. It was a case between two neighbors. In fact, it was featured on Channel 12, but this was like back in the 80s, but it was kind of, I call it the Dolan case, where the neighbor actually put a surveillance camera up on the back master bedroom window of the Dolan family. And then that same neighbor also allegedly was dumping trash and other debris into their backyard, and then was heckling and cackling at their kids whenever they were in the yard. Told them that he had put up his camera and the camera was focused on them and he was watching them, etc. So that was more of a private feud, you know, and that was back in the 80s, early 90s. That would be the type of feud you might see where nobody else really knew about it, except we took that one to Channel 12, and then the camera came down pretty quickly, and and the other neighbor moved out of the neighborhood, and it got resolved relatively quickly.
That's what you had to do. You had to call the news back then and actually get that, help to get the public, aware of it.
Right, and get it out there, and then that resolved that. But now you don't have to call the paper. You can just basically do a Facebook post, and if you want to boost the Facebook post, now you've gone beyond your immediate group of friends, and you can really blast it out to more of the public. The other thing is that, we say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, now not only is there ability to post something in various words, but there's the ability to post photos and the ability to doctor up the photos, and basically suggest that somebody is in a photo in a compromising position or something when that's not really the actual photo. So we've got that issue. We also have the issue of messages going viral and spreading much faster. And so something that would have been contained in a tiny small circle or within a small group now has this potential to publicly humiliate someone when they might do something that you disagree with. And then everything gets put into writing. And so it's there unless the person can go through, and I've had clients go through the hoops of asking Facebook to remove posts, et cetera, but that's pretty laborious, and it takes a lot of work to get a social media company to permanently remove a post and make sure that it's not saved in some metadata or some, archived somewhere and definitively delete it. Or
and if somebody's taken a screen capture of it before that happens, there's no getting that back from
Absolutely. And the internet it's forever unless, and then if somebody takes a screenshot and then puts it back out there, it doesn't go away. And so it's much harder to quash these modern day feuds that have gotten out there. And then you're aware of the GoFundMe issue that came into our office.
Yeah, we had a case that, and from what we understand of this issue, these two families were, having a dispute over kids, sort of a custody adoption issue. And the one individual had apparently created a GoFundMe page, which is, normally used to sort of crowdfund. Usually it's charitable things. Sometimes it's interesting projects, but it's basically a way for people to say, hey, public, I have this thing that I think, is worthy of your money and support, please donate a little bit. But in this instance, he was asking his community to donate towards his legal fees, and then had a litany of false statements about the other party in this case, calling them, a child molester. And I mean, just insinuating all of this terrible, terrible stuff and saying, you need to fund my legal fees because I'm having to do battle with this person, and all written down on the GoFundMe page. And, that's where you kind of get into some of these, okay, now does that person have a cause of action because of what was written down on the internet and what's not going to go away? And it's kind of prolongs these grudges too, I think, when everything's in writing like that.
Well, in that case, they don't identify the folks they're planning to litigate against, but anybody close to them that might know the inside story of what's going on in a domestic, family law battle can kind of figure out, well, who are they talking about? Who are they targeting? And so now we're looking at, okay, is there potential defamation? Is there not defamation? And, it's basically when that information, when those statements, child molester, I mean, that's pretty strong stuff going out there. And then that's something that potentially you can try to get Facebook to, or you can try to, get the social media or whatever to try to take down. But it's so vague. Who are they talking about? Only the inner circle kind of really knows who's being discussed in that sort of setting. So most GoFundMe pages we know are used for good purposes, but they can certainly be used for other purposes with defamatory remarks thrown in there.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that kind of brings up another point. Is this always, this use of the internet, is this always negative when people are maybe exposing something or getting into a disagreement with somebody?
Well, I think if you look at certain things, I think the Me Too movement has been really good. I mean, it is had folks come out, tell their stories. We've got the gymnast with Dr. Nasser. We've got the Hannibal Buress comedy routine going viral about the sexual assault allegations against Bill Cosby, which basically ended his career. We're seeing folks resign. My husband and I have been watching House of Cards. It's our latest series, and you've got Kevin Spacey resigning over allegations in that case, and so we are seeing this movement, which actually has been very, from a woman's right advocate, and since we do sexual harassment and cases in our office and everything, it seems to be a very positive thing to the extent the allegations can be substantiated and they're not being made up, which is another whole entirely different issue. But when you have a number of women coming forward with the same stories or similar stories about the same assailant, then that starts to build some credibility. And that whole movement is really changing how we look at the tolerance of folks that have engaged in sexual harassment and sexual assaults and whatnot. So that has been a very good thing. It also gives people who traditionally have not had much power to expose wrongdoing on a larger scale, and then in a lot of these cases, especially any civil type claim is going to be time barred. And most women in these cases didn't want to come forward for various reasons. It could be, it could kill their career if they came forward. So now, while they don't necessarily have a civil cause of action to bring, especially because too much time has passed, they at least have a jury in the public and in the media, you know, and in the social media. And so that has been a pretty positive movement with regard to this whole modern day feuding. So the modern day feuding can be done in a positive kind of change how we look at things.
Right. You realize other people share the same story of something that you thought maybe it was only an experience that you had. And I think that's where the public nature of the internet really allows people to kind of speak truth to power, and in good ways sometimes.
Right.
And
right.
Then,
but it flushes out some of these kind of sexual predators, you know, and we've got another one right now against a doctor who, because of social media, more and more, and in addition to the public media, more and more women have come forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting away from sort of famous or celebrity feuds, is this something that you've seen more and more of with clients? I mean, just fights between private citizens that make their way onto the internet?
Yes, and that's, I mentioned earlier, we're doing more and more cease and desist letters than ever before, and you're trying to look for, okay, what are the potential causes of action out there that we can bring? And we mentioned defamation as one of them, but of course, truth is a defense to any defamation.
Right.
And then if the person who is the subject of the defamation is not totally clear, like who that is, like with those vague references to, you know, the GoFundMe page because they want to litigate against the child molester, who are they referring to? So it's really hard to say that that's directly defamatory. So I mentioned the Dolan case with the neighbor feud. When that case came about in the 90s, early 90s, late 80s, the first thing I did was, and that's really dating myself too, but the first thing I did as a very young attorney at that time was look into what are the causes of action for invasions of privacy in Virginia. And they are extremely limited. There really are no causes of action for invasions of privacy in Virginia, except for one, which is the one which we call misappropriation of a person's name or likeness for commercial gain. And so if somebody uses your image, a photo of you in advertising or for any sort of commercial gain, then you might be able to bring a claim. So there is the two statutes, and probably people could care less about the numbers, but anyway, there's a civil claim under Virginia Code 8.01-40 for the unauthorized use of name or pictures of any person, but it has to be used for advertising purposes or the purposes of trade. Okay, so if you're just posting somebody's image on Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, you know, any sort of social media, and you're not using it for advertising or trade, that's not going to violate that statute.
Right.
You know, and there's a criminal component to that statute, but in that one you have to knowingly use that name or picture for advertising purposes or for the purpose of trade. And so now you have to show clear intent, you know, as opposed to just an accidental posting. So other than those two statutes, and then we'll talk a little bit about cyberbullying and cyberstalking and some of the other criminal statutes that are out there, but the unauthorized use of name or picture for used in advertising or trade, or we call it for a commercial purpose, for some sort of monetary gain, ideally. Other than that civil statute, all the other statutes tend to be criminal in nature. So I'm getting back to your question, actually, which is, are we seeing a lot of these in the office? And yes, we are. And the thing that is puzzling is, okay, if we're going to send out a cease and desist letter, then what are the types of claims that we can say, you know, you're violating? Are you violating these particular criminal statutes? Is it defamatory? So we can say that this is slander or this is defamation. And, you know, so so it needs to stop for that reason. In some cases where the Facebook posting could potentially interfere with somebody's job or any contracts that may have. So remember, we had the dog club feuds.
Yes.
Okay. So some folks that belong to certain rescue clubs for dogs can be very, very devoted to that particular breed of dog and rescuing that particular breed. And so we've seen some of this kind of feuding between various committed rescue dog groups. Let's put it that way. And so if it rises to the level where it might interfere with some of the contracts that they are engaged in to rescue dogs, then we can potentially say that whether it's defamation or not, that the remarks that are being cast out there, if they tortiously interfere with any business expectancy or contractual relations, that's another civil type claim that we can make. Or if they interfere with somebody's job, because they're basically imputing to that person some sort of inability to do their job, then we can potentially say that that's both defamatory and it's also potentially tortiously interfering with their business expectancy or their contractual relations or, in fact, their job position. And so we can make that sort of claim. But it gets extremely tricky when we're looking for the various types of causes of action that we can make in these cases where somebody is using the internet to attack somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Remember, we are asking you to call into the show if you have any questions about modern day cyber-feuding, use of the internet, any invasion of privacy, and the phone number is 804-454-1366. We will be taking a break in a few minutes, and so feel free to call into the show after the break. So go ahead, Katie.
Yeah. So we've talked about some of the different causes of actions that we as attorneys have to kind of look for. Has Virginia started to develop anything, more on point for these cases so that people have a remedy under the law when they're victims of some of this internet bullying? Or
unfortunately not. Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the criminal causes of action that have actually come up in the last few years. And when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about revenge porn. Yes. And we'll talk about that statute. But again, the problem is that these statutes are all criminal in nature, not civil. So that means that you have to go swear out a warrant, you have to go swear out a complaint with the magistrate, or you have to get a police officer that's willing to arrest somebody or bring a complaint. And a lot of police officers, they're busy with, with gunshot cases and everything else. They don't want to get involved in these kind of computer stalking, cyberbullying cases. So having a criminal statute isn't really super helpful unless you can get the attention of a magistrate or a police officer or a prosecutor that's interested, and where it's so bad, and I think the revenge porn we're going to talk about after the break is really one of those cases where it's super bad. But we do have the criminal statutes for cyber stalking, and we're going to talk about those as soon as we come back after the break.
All right.
You've been listening to Raising the Bar, Greater Richmond's premier law talk radio show. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
With SRN News, I'm Rich Thomason in Washington. President Trump says if it means keeping the American people safe, he's willing to allow a government shutdown, and he says it would be the Democrats' fault. Congress, meanwhile, is working to avoid a shutdown on Friday. The president has directed the Pentagon to look into holding a grand military parade in Washington. That would take place later this year. Vice President Pence says the administration is preparing to tighten the screws on North Korea by imposing the toughest economic sanctions ever on Pyongyang. The sanctions would be aimed at forcing North Korea to give up its nuclear and its ballistic missile programs. Wintry weather resulting in flight delays, cancellations this morning in New York, Washington, Detroit, and Chicago. That's according to FlightAware.com. The Dow opening down 83 points. More details at srnnews.com.
Interested in trading as a way to generate extra monthly income? Listen up. Before you sign up for some garbage program or awkward in-person seminar, you really need to hear about the online trader program that everyone's talking about. This is the program that allows you to get your account funded with someone else's money. That's right. Apiary Fund will gladly put up to $100,000 of their money into your trading account. And the best part, you get to keep 85% of the profits without putting in a dime of your own money. Apiary Fund and this program are growing like crazy. As a special offer, Apiary Fund is allowing our listeners to get started for free. Just call 800-959-4526 and leave us your email address, and we will send you all the exciting details of how to trade Apiary Fund's money and not your own. Call 800-959-4526 and leave your email address on the voicemail. Your free report will be sent right away. 800-959-4526. That's 800-959-4526.
John Frederick.
I just want to know, did they lie in front of a judge? I don't know what the debate is here. Did you lie or did you tell the truth? You can't get half pregnant.
Morning, noon, and night, dishing the straight talk with no chaser.
Then you got Tricky Dick Durbin saying, well, if you fire Rosenstein, it's a constitutional crisis. No, the fact that he's not fired is a constitutional crisis. It's the exact opposite, Dick.
Get your truth by the truckload. The John Frederick Show. Weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. on WNTW, AM 820 and 97.7 FM.
Del Wamsley here. The first thing you're going to have to learn is until you stop expecting politicians or anyone else to change your life isn't going to change. The only person who can change your life is you, but you need to know how. Listen to my show, the Del Wamsley Radio Show, where the hype ends and the help begins.
Tune in to the Del Wamsley Show weekdays from noon to 1 right here on WNTW 820 The Answer, Richmond's choice for conservative talk.
Music.
Now, back to Raising the Bar. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
We are back. This is Raising the Bar Law Talk Radio Show. This is Attorney Colleen Quinn along with Attorney Katie Kitts-Dean. And today we are talking about modern day feuding, including cyberbullying, cyberstalking, revenge porn, and many other ways that folks are using the internet in particular to attack each other. And we talked about how some of the cyber feuding actually is being used in a positive way with the Me Too movement. But we also now are turning to the topic of revenge porn.
Yes.
As well as the cyber harassment and cyber stalking statutes that are out there. There are really very few remedies in Virginia and in most states for these types of cases. And the law really hasn't caught up with today's form of modern day cyber feuding.
Absolutely. I think that's true. So, you mentioned that, we do have some criminal statutes on the books. Can you give us an overview of what those are?
Yeah. So let's talk about the revenge porn statute, because that one came around in 2016. And actually these cyber harassment, cyber stalking statutes all were 2016. So this is pretty recent.
Right.
And they're only criminal statutes. They're not, they don't give you a civil cause of action for monetary recovery. So as we're talking about before the break, on a criminal cause of action, you have to swear out a complaint before a magistrate, or you have to get a police officer involved to help you or to bring that complaint, or you have to get the attention of a prosecutor, a Commonwealth's attorney, or a federal prosecutor. And that can be extremely difficult when they're busy with actual, physical rape and assault type cases. So the revenge porn statute, for anybody that's actually interested in the code section, it's 18.2-38. And basically that statute provides that if anybody has the intent to coerce, harass, intimidate, or maliciously disseminate or sell any videographic or still images created by any means that depict another person who is either totally nude or in a state of undress, so as to expose the private area, the genitals, pubic area, buttocks, or female breast, or where they have reason to know that they're not authorized or licensed to distribute such videographic or photo images, then they'll be guilty of a class 1 misdemeanor. Now that is not a real high level crime, actually. It's pretty low level. But at least it's out there. So we have the ability to say, okay, that is a crime to do that. And Katie, you're pretty familiar with the case that we had in 2016 in Virginia, the Moorhead versus Virginia case. So why don't you tell the viewers?
So again, as you said, this is kind of a new law, so we don't really have a lot of case law stemming from the statute. But we did find one case that was where someone was prosecuted under the statute, and the facts of this case really demonstrate why it's good that we have at least something on the books to go after this kind of behavior, because in this case, it was a couple that was married but had separated, and before they separated, the wife had sent her husband, several
sexy photos,
let's call them,
of some of those prohibited areas.
Yes, exactly. And so he had these. And after they separated, she apparently was not, returning his phone calls, and he would get very drunk late at night, and he started posting these nude photos of her on a website called myex.com.
He was maybe a little PO'd, I guess.
Yes. So he was posting these nude photos, and then he would email her and say, look what I just put online. And the content of some of his emails and text messages to her were it was absolutely not repeatable on the public airwaves. Yeah. But it was pretty crass stuff. And then he also at one point ended up posting some of this content on the Facebook page for the restaurant where she worked.
And that's that where you're getting into the tortious interference with her job.
And so her manager was having to apologize to customers who had seen it and were complaining. And it was just really, really nasty behavior. And ultimately what the case was about is he lived in Virginia Beach, she lived in Prince William, and he had been prosecuted in Prince William, and he tried to say, this can't stick because I never went to Prince William. I'm, Virginia Beach. You brought this case in the wrong place. And they said, nope, you sent her these emails. You knew she was in Prince William. She received the emails in Prince William. This conviction is going to stick. And so that was another case where he, maybe never set foot in the county where he was prosecuted and was still subject to being prosecuted under this law because he was sending the images to that location. And so the law did allow for a little bit of flexibility, but I also have to imagine the judge in that case was not super impressed with this guy.
Yeah, I would imagine so too.
Not trying to let him out of a conviction.
And that case, that's a horrible case. It's horrible what was happening to her with those photos being used, and then to the point where it's interfering with her job. And yet there's so little law. We've got this, fortunately, they have the revenge porn statute in 2016, and this was happening in 2016. But it's not, we talked about not having any case law for invasion of privacy, because you would think that would be an invasion of her privacy.
It sounds very illegal what he did, and so you think there's got to be several laws that protect me from
right. It wasn't really defamation though, except if he's using certain language that was defamatory, but the actual photos themselves are true.
It's not a false statement.
Right. And then he's not using those photos for commercial gain. Right. So it doesn't violate the civil or criminal statute.
Doing it for revenge.
Right. And so you look at that and you're like, wow, she should have some more legal standing. When it got to the point of posting with the employer, I would say at that point she had the tortious interference with her job expectancy. So she would have that claim in addition to trying to get him prosecuted under the revenge porn statute. Same thing with the cyber stalking or the cyber harassment. And remember, it's harassment, right? Because as I've said before, my 11th grade English teacher, very matron Southernly, Llewellyn Connolly, always reminded the class, it's harass, for one never talks about harass, right? So that's how we always remember it's harassment. So there's a cyber stalking statute and a cyber harassment statute in Virginia. But again, these are criminal statutes. They don't give anyone a civil recovery. And the cyber stalking statute actually is not of much use. I'll tell you that because it basically says a person's guilty of the crime of personal trespass by computer when he or she uses a computer or computer network to cause physical injury to an individual.
Mm.
So, most of the use that we're talking about in these cyber-feuds is mental, emotional harm, and trying to show that words or images that are being posted in a negative manner are causing physical injury. That's a pretty tough burden to meet, a burden of proof. We are aware, though, of those poor cases where somebody has actually committed suicide because of cyber bullying.
Well, I mean, the thing we have to remember, kids have access to the internet and all of this technology, and that's when it gets really scary, some of the things that people are able to post and do and insinuate about another person. And then you have a 10 or 11-year-old who maybe doesn't have the most developed sense of self, and
right, and they're not, they don't have that same level of emotional intelligence or that sense of security, etc. And so it can really hit home, especially with young kids when they are being harassed. We had a case where one gal, she was injured. It was a personal injury case we were handling, and she went out with the injury, and it was a high school student. And then a lot of the friends on Facebook were posting that she must be pregnant. She went out with a head injury, and so she wasn't able to return to school and had to be homeschooled. But of course, the first thing that pops into everyone's mind is, oh, she must be at home because she's pregnant. And then, of course, then the posts go out there. And that was another one of those cases where we had to send the cease and desist letters and basically say, stop
posting this rumor.
Right, this rumor about this poor gal. So the other statute is the cyber stalking statute. And this one is basically harassment by computer, and it's got more teeth to it. So if anybody with the intent to coerce, intimidate, or harass any person uses a computer or computer network to communicate obscene, vulgar, profane, lewd, lascivious, or indecent language, or makes any suggestion or proposal of an obscene nature, or threatens any illegal or immoral act, again, you can be guilty of a Class 1 misdemeanor, which is a low-level misdemeanor, but still, at least, this is something where, especially if a parent knows that a child is being subject to cyber bullying, they can at least go and swear out a warrant or, a complaint on their child's behalf. Or in our case, as lawyers, we oftentimes are sending the cease and desist letters. You are committing a crime,
right?
And we're going to report it to the police or the magistrate or whatever, and help our client go swear out that complaint if you continue to commit this crime. And then going back to what we were talking about earlier, though, the problem is that removing that stuff, if it's gotten into the public venue, if it's gone beyond a Facebook private page or whatever, and it's gone out more to the public, then trying to capture that and make sure that everything is removed from every little leak that got out there, or that got, basically then shared with, forward and forward and forward, or that if something goes more viral, trying to recapture it and bring it back can be really difficult. And remember, today we are talking about modern day cyber-feuding, cyberbullying, revenge porn, and the like. And if you'd like to call into the show before we wrap up today, call in at 804-454-1366.
So you've talked a little bit about this already, but we do have some laws that are already in place and that we've had in place for a while that I think lawyers are having to maybe use a little bit more creatively in these types of cyber situations. So, and you talked earlier about your Dolan case with the camera and Virginia not really having a cause of action for invasion of privacy. Is that unique to Virginia? Is that, how do you get around that? Because it seems like someone pointing a camera in your window, that just seems like something that they shouldn't be allowed to do. So, how do you sort of...
Virginia's not that different from most states. There are some states out there that do provide a little bit more security, but we're not that far afield of most of the states that are out there. When we look at other states, Virginia is actually on the forefront of the revenge porn law because 17 states have enacted some sort of revenge porn law. And most states make that crime a a misdemeanor punishable under the criminal code. A few make it a felony, like Hawaii, Arizona, and Idaho. So it's got a little more teeth to it, which is great. But Colorado is the only state with a statute on the books that allows also that private or civil cause of action for revenge porn when somebody's private intimate parts have been posted. Then they can bring a civil action, and they can also get injunctive relief. That is, they can get an injunction that stops it from happening and makes them take down whatever the images are. And basically, they can get the greater of $10,000 or actual damages incurred as a result of the posting of the private images. They can also get attorney fees and costs. So I would love to see more states implement this civil cause, this private cause of action like Colorado has done. When we're talking about the limited remedies in Virginia, we had a question in the studio during the break talking about this concept of not having a cause of action for the use of one's likeness unless it's used for commercial gain or whatever. And so the question in the studio from Scott was, how are these video companies able to use the likenesses of these college kids in the video games and the basketball games and the football games, et cetera? And in most of those cases, those kids have signed a release and have licensed the use of their image. And they're not getting any financial gain from it, and they've signed a release to that effect. Of course, they're getting the exposure, and people are getting to know them. So especially if they go pro, they're already known, et cetera. And so if somebody signs a release, for their likeness to be used, well, then they're allowing that, and they want that to happen. If I had a situation, because we also do surrogacy, we do such a crazy mix of practices. But I had a situation where I had a sperm donor contact me.
Oh, yeah.
And he had donated, a long time, several decades ago. And at the time, when you donated, you thought it was anonymous. But now these kids are all finding their sperm donors, and especially through Ancestry.com. And
because the internet has really opened up a lot of,
It has, and 23andMe and whatnot. And so anyway, the children that were the product of his voluminous sperm donation were starting to contact him. And one of the questions was one of the kids wanted to do a documentary featuring him. And, I had to explain that there's really nothing, like he could say, I don't want you to videotape me. I don't want you to photograph me. But if he has photos already on the internet, and that documentary is being done just for educational purposes and not being done for any sort of commercial gain, there really is no way of preventing that product of his sperm donation child from doing that documentary and using his name and his likeness, as long as it's not for commercial for gain.
And they're not saying anything false about him. It's just information he would prefer to keep private, I think.
Exactly. And we could try to do like a cease and desist letter, but I don't know to what effect, because we really wouldn't have the law that would give us much teeth in that regard. So when we're looking at these invasion of privacy issues, there's just such limited law in Virginia as well as most of the other states. So there's one other little statute. There's a narrow exception for computer invasion of privacy, and that statute's been on the books since 2006. And again, but it's a criminal statute. Again, it's a class 1 misdemeanor. That's using a computer network to intentionally examine without authority any employment, salary, credit, or any other financial or identifying information. And that law is related to identity theft issues. But when you're looking at this whole concept of the modern day feuding, the invasion of privacy, we're really having to dig deep. And then what we're finding is we pretty much have criminal statutes that provide some protection, but not much in the way of civil statutes.
And I'm wondering if you can just talk about that a little bit more. I mean, what is, for people who are the victim of something like this, I'm just thinking, this poor wife who had her images, blasted all over myx.com and her, employee Facebook page, her husband, he was prosecuted, but as you said, class 1 misdemeanor, he got, popped with this kind of minor criminal charge. And I mean, I'm guessing like her family and her friends and everyone, her business was kind of blasted out everywhere. And that seems like the type of thing you should be able to get a little bit of money for.
Right. I mean, I would be mortified if I had, if my parents, if my 26-year-old twin boys were seeing pictures of me nude. I mean, that would,
right.
In compromising positions or whatever. I mean, that would be so horrible to have that happen.
And it's a lack of civil recovery just feels a little unfair almost.
It does. So one other cause of action that we didn't mention is intentional infliction of emotional distress. But that is so hard to prove in Virginia. One of the cases that is a case in point on that is a case where a woman was raising a child with her boyfriend, and the boyfriend thought it was his kid, and they raised the child together until the child was about 4 years old. Then they broke up, and she basically told him it wasn't his kid, and that she had the kid by somebody else, even though he thought for 4 years it was his child. And of course, he tried to, assert custody, et cetera, but he wasn't the biological father. So one of the things he resorted to was intentional infliction of emotional distress. She had this child knowing it wasn't his, made him to believe it was his. For 4 years, he helped raise the child, became very, very devoted to the child. And the Virginia Supreme Court basically held that that was not sufficient to arise to the level of intentional infliction of emotional distress.
Yeah.
There's also negligent infliction, but they're both so hard to prove. So even in the Moorhead versus Virginia revenge porn case, that still is pretty tough. I mean, you can try to claim intentional infliction of emotional distress, and in that case, it might actually have gotten to the point of crossing that threshold. Also, as I mentioned, she could probably claim the tortious interference with her job. But the key thing is capturing. When we have clients, we want them to capture the information before it is taken down or removed or whatever. So, getting that photograph, capturing that data so that so we have it there, so we know that we can prove, because it can to some extent be the privacy settings can be changed on Facebook, or things can be changed that can then change that person's ability to bring a case because they no longer have access to the evidence.
Right.
So the key thing is making sure that you preserve the evidence.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about Virginia. How has this really been addressed by other states? What causes of action have they been recognizing in other states just to deal with this issue?
Well, in Indiana, there was a case like the Virginia Moorhead case where the ex-husband basically distributed Polaroids taken of his ex-wife when she was nude and they were having sexual relations or, whatever she might have been doing in the privacy of their own home, which he then decided to make public. And so in that Indiana case, that ex-wife actually was able to prevail on an intentional infliction of emotional distress under Indiana law. And also under Indiana law, she was able to prevail on an intentional invasion of privacy, which we don't have in Virginia.
Right.
There also was a cyber stalking case that was brought under in the First Circuit, basically where a woman brought several criminal complaints against her ex-boyfriend for, again, posting explicit photos of her on Craigslist and giving her home address to men on Craigslist. Also, the ex-boyfriend had created fake Facebook accounts and MySpace profiles and porn sites and posted photos of her on them.
That's so scary.
Yeah, it really, really is. And so in that case, he was convicted of the cyber stalking. But that's pretty severe.
Well, I mean, you were talking about, these cases don't always have physical, injuries involved. That's one that absolutely could, if he's just posting her contact information and, all over Craigslist and these sites and sort of inviting creepy people to come find her. I mean, essentially.
Right.
So,
And so he's definitely putting her in harm's way in that regard. There was another case out of California that basically was a case where we have a girlfriend against the former boyfriend. And again, he had posted nude photos of her that had been at the time taken with her consent because they were in that relationship, which is the danger of when you're in a relationship of having any nude photos taken of you, is that then you have them out there. And so basically In that case, the ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend took the photos and posted them on a fake Facebook page and then sent friend requests to this poor woman's friends and family.
Oh my goodness.
I can't imagine. Oh my gosh. And so in that case, she was able to prevail and actually got an award of a civil verdict from a jury of $250,000. She was able to bring under California law an invasion of privacy claim, which again, we don't have in Virginia, except for the commercial use.
Right.
And she was able to prevail on an intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence, and they have a law out there called statutory impersonation, which is an interesting one.
Yeah. So that must have been the posting in a fake profile and doing friend requests that way.
Right, which is almost like fraud.
Yeah.
You know. There also was a case out of New York. And again, this was again a boyfriend-girlfriend case where there were nude photos that were posted on his Twitter account. And then he sent those photos to her sister and her employer. I mean, talk about serious revenge porn. I mean, and so he claimed he had obtained permission to send the photos.
Well, I'm sure she said that was fine. Yeah.
yeah, sure. Send them to my employer. I really want my employer to see me nude. Yes. And so in that case, she brought criminal charges of second-degree aggravated harassment, second-degree dissemination of an unlawful surveillance image, and public display of offensive sexual material, which were the causes of action under New York criminal law. But unfortunately, those charges evidently were dismissed because there wasn't sufficient evidence. So then another case we're aware of out of California, again, was an intentional infliction of emotional distress case where, again, there was the boyfriend-girlfriend posting the nude photos. And that one basically led to thoughts of suicide. And that was sufficient to show the serious emotional distress. And that's probably what we would need in Virginia is something pretty extreme in order to prevail on that intentional infliction claim.
All right. Well, we are getting close to the end of our show here, but just one last question. We've been talking about causes of action against the people who post the photos. What about anything that a person might have against a website or internet provider?
Right. Very, very difficult to prevail on, especially because there's a specific exclusion in Virginia's criminal statute for going against the provider. It's not really their fault. And then under federal law passed in 1996, there is the Communications Decency Act that does say that no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So again, very, very difficult. And the Ninth Circuit actually is the only one that allowed someone to prevail against one of those commercial providers of social media, et cetera. So we are wrapping up our show today, and next week we are going to switch gears to a very different topic.
Happy topic.
We're going to be evaluating surrogacy and gestational carrier agreements from the intended parents' side. And so Katie Kitzstein will be interviewing our client, Jen Nixon. So join us next Wednesday at 9 a.m. for Raising the Bar Law Talk Radio Show. Thank you.